So some soil problems again. When we have young soils versus old soils, you see how compacted the soils are on the right? So very low nutrient content, very compacted soils, and the tree roots are not developed to push through the compacted soils. So what are some other special problems that we might have here? Well, we need to try to restore humus. Remember when I said they cut down the jungle and all of the 90% of the biomass is in the trees, and they take out the trees, they burned it, so nothing's left in the soil. So when you go to farm, you don't really have any humic material. There's no biomass in the soil. It's just like high clay concrete. So we need to look into cover crops. We have to cover the soils back, grow legumes, and cover cropping, especially focusing on nitrogen fixation. We can use any type of perennials, and one that's really cute here in the tropics to help with this is called Lucina. Lucina is high in protein. It has an 18% protein. So some people actually take the leaves of Lucina, they grind it up into powder, and people will eat the powder for protein content. And so that's a great tree because it's a perennial. It's nitrogen fixation. It also can be coppiced or pollarded. So if I cut it and I take the whole tree, it grows back from the trunk really fast. So cool. And then I take that and what do I do with it? So every morning, Pichon has a job. He wakes up at 8, he gets on his little tractor, he drives to the back of the property, and he goes for about 1 hour and he cuts down Lucina. And he brings it to the goats. So we feed our goats Lucina trees. They're high in protein, and the goat eats the leaves, it peels off the bark. And then when we made charcoal, that was the trunks of the trees that they had eaten. And then they grow back every year. So we have a perennial food source, and then the goat can give us milk if we want. It also can give us goat. And then we have manure. So when we did our compost, guess what? We had goat manure. So we can start to see how cycles can be achieved to have food for us by understanding the relationship between trees and animals, and then us being an animal also. So we can restore our soils, you guys have learned, and the tropics is a great place to learn agriculture because it's so bad. So here in the wet, dry tropics is one of the worst soil conditions in the world other than living in a pure desert, all right? It's really tough. Very poor mineral content because of the laterite. 8 months of the year, no rainfall event. And so the only thing that saves it is that we do have this rain now, but it's very, very poor conditions. So we can add things to our soils to try to work on the soil conditions, such as superphosphates, balsam, even cement powder. So even you take concrete powder, guys, in the bag. You would mix concrete, and you can add it into your biofert, and that would get the minerals from limestone. Because limestone would have better mineral profile than our laterite, because our very poor sand, basically, sand rock or something. So these supply essential nutrients, and they will increase the soil's pH. We also have a big problem with the low pH, and we remember that if your pH is wrong, you can't transfer the minerals with the ion exchange, right? So we have to work on increasing the pH. So hence, the soil's ability to hold nutrients against leaching. So if your pH is low, the rains come now, lots of rain, and all my nutrients go out to the aquifer. So whatever is added or available as fertilizer, give it a light spread all over your bed at a 6-week interval. We do it here every 4 weeks. We have a new course, right? So people have asked me many times, almost every course, somebody comes up and they're like, how do you do this every month? How can you give a course every month? Well, every month I have to work on my garden, right? Correct? Every month I need to make compost. Every month I need to move compost. Every month I need to spread biofert. Every month I need to move my worm castings, right? You see how easy it would be to do a course if that's the things that you're going to do anyway? And if I didn't do the course, guess what I have to do? All those things without you helping. So doing a course is a great opportunity, especially in a place like this where the soils are so poor. And then we can start to teach, well, locals and people from all over the world these advanced techniques because it's so difficult. We're starting with growing with nothing. So if we do that, we can return the crop waste. So anytime we have waste, like we went for our mulch, our day when we did our compost, we would go get the corn stubble, any organic waste, we need to accumulate it and process it through our systems back into our soils. That's essential. If we do that, we can reduce the pH of the coral sands if you live near the coast to 6.5 to 7. And if you happen to live in some of these areas, have fresh volcanic areas, any volcanic rock dust has the highest mineral content of any rock. So lots of people will actually purchase volcanic rock dust to add to their biofert. So you can order it off the internet if you don't live in an area that has it. So that's nice. So then we also have in areas of this, tropical soils are considered deep granitic sands. Remember, sands don't transfer ionic exchange, so there's no mineral content. So the soils over rotted granites are particular problems, and they arise in open, coarse granitic sands, often very deep, and they don't retain mulch beyond one growing season. So again, to go like interesting in Thailand, they do have different regions. So here we have lots of clay, which is good because clay holds moisture and things like this. But if I go to Panya in the north, they're on the mountainside, and it's all sand. So they have this deep granitic sands. So they don't hold water well, and their nutrients that they put in each time they put their compost, each year it rains, it leaches all the compost out. So they have to keep mineralizing. It's a different issue. So we have to still understand that even though we have the same conditions of rain and dry, we have different soils. So then what their system, or their integrated system that they would perform, would be more focused on their type of soil condition. And ours is focused on our type of soil condition, even though we both grow the same fruits or vegetables, right? So in these areas, if they were there, they have deep free draining or low nutrient soils. So some trees that are associated to live in these types of soils are like palms. So they can get palms to grow really well. That'll give them that dapple shading, right, for the tropical suns. And then they can work on their composting regime by any mulching, same thing. And then they can work to improve their soils. Niches or clefts in granite masses. So sometimes when we find these around mountains, there's actually, the rains have come, big rains, there's nothing left. We only find granite. And we then have to almost try to grow. So here a person has put compost and planted a tree in a hole. And to get that one tree to grow, and it'll start to drop leaves over years to get more humic material. So that's how hard the conditions can be in some of these places. Granite outcroppings, no tree grows. So if we do that, we can start to form the mycelium web. So that one tree starts to create a cycle. The mycelium start to work, and they start to move nutrients, and then we can build up ecosystems. So examples of very good trees to grow in tropics when very poor conditions, they do well. Examples could be the mango, can grow in super difficult conditions. Cashew, pomegranates, persimmons, any citrus trees do well. Tamarind, lychee, custard apple, or avocados. They do well in these very poor soil conditions, and they help to develop. So at this point, why would I pick these trees over every tree? There are other trees that will do well, but these also have really good yields, meaning that I can sell the product. So I can get a good money, and it works in very difficult conditions. Some other things that you might want to look into in these types of conditions would be dates, coconuts, dooms, Brussels. Any of these are going to also, these are like desert, almost getting into desert fruits, are going to work in these difficult conditions. They have very deep-rooted trees. So if we start to look into gardens, so now I'm in the tropics, and how would I approach tropical gardening? So one way, here we see a trench. It's an effective to evacuate long trenches into loose sand. So this is basically a sandy soil, very poor. They're going to dig out a trench, okay? It's not a swale. It's basically a trench. They're going to take the dirt and make a raised bed. At this point, they're going to basically mulch the trench. So they've dug out the poor sands, and they're going to put back in humic material, whether it's cardboard, sticks, anything like that. So if they do that, they're going to start to try to hold water, because a humic material will hold the moisture. And then they'll put this, and then the plant has access to the humic material. So household waste water can then lead into these. So remember when we saw the picture where we could take our shower and we could make the valve go to this trench today? So this day I take a shower, goes to that trench. And this one goes to that trench. And the trenches are underneath my beds, right? So I've dug out the bad soil. I've filled it back with the best humic material, cardboard, compost, sticks work really well, branches, put it all in there. It'll hold the moisture. And then put a pipe in, which is called a French drain. So a French drain is when you take a pipe and then you perforate the pipe. You cut it so that when the water goes through, it'll drip out. So I have a pipe going and it drips. So it's like underground drip irrigation. Works well. Other things that you could do is build raised beds. Our garden is very similar to this because the soil that we started with is like concrete or something. Laterite, it's like stones, red stone stuff. You can't grow anything in it. So even digging into it's very hard. So I was like, man, I can't dig into that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to raise and put compost and good soil, and I'll just put good soil on top of the bad stuff, and then I'll just grow in my good soil. So that's why we work on our composting. We're always building our beds, right? Each year we get a little bit more and a little bit more soil and a little bit more soil. So every year we get better growing conditions, because like today, how many wheelbarrows did we put in the garden? Well, those wheelbarrows equal food. The vegetable needs something to eat. So we put a lot of humic material, but we also put biochars, and we can put clays, and we can put sands. We can work on the structure. So here's a really great deal. This is called square foot gardening. So they took this and they make zones. And these zones are in square foots. And then this is very ergonomical. It's based on a concept called double reach. You should never make a garden bed more than what you can reach on two sides. If you do, make it too wide. People will step in the bed to work. I go to work and I can't reach, so what do? I step. And if I step in the bed, I compress the soils very bad. So I never want to make it more than double reach. Double, which is about 1 meter to 1.2 meters, depending on how big you are. So if we do that, we're going to start to create soil life. And the soil life is going to facilitate that nutrient transfer. So we can have ants and termites. They're very active in this type of environment. So here at Raktamachat, there are termites everywhere. Okay? So it's very difficult when we start to look at our housing that we can use wood. And to be very, very careful about wood. Because we can't treat the wood with chemicals. They don't have it. And even if it did, I don't know I want to use treated chemical stuff in my home. So I have to be careful about that. So this is one thing. So we can break down materials utilizing ants and termites. So since they're so prolific, that's why long-term composting strategies can work really well here. So if I take my brush and stuff and I clean up the farm and I put it into my swale, the termites and ants will come and eat it. And then after the next year, I can take that out as soil and put it into my garden. So we can work with what some people might see as a pest. I actually see as performing a function. They break down the soil. So that's something you can work with in the tropics. So here's a huge termite mound. And these termites are going around and they're grabbing all the debris and they bring it to the termite mound and they create soils, right? So you could work with that. So ants and termites certainly have an important role to play in these areas. So here we go. In 1971, we had records that both the leafcutter ant in South America and termite mounds in Uganda assisted forest spread and established islands of taller vegetation. So they would go in and they clear an area of the vegetation, allowing that dapple sunlight, remember? And that sunlight would come in and then you could get increased things. So we can start to look at these conditions as places that we can grow. That ant and that termite has created that condition for us if we're in those type of environments. In humid areas, such sequence of tall grasses are followed by shrubs. So like castor oil beans, purses, and thorny legumes. So we can start to look to these types of plants, and lots of these legumes also have yields for us. We can eat them or fodders for animals, right? So these are in places that there's really difficult conditions. This is like you go to the place and there's 10,000 people there in a camp and there's nothing to eat, right? Well, we have to start to look to different species and different ways of producing agriculture. I don't think the way to feed Africa is to grow grain in the Midwest of the United States, sell it as an undervalued commodity subsidized by some weird government thing, messing with money on the internet, and then shipping it in airplanes. So that the farmers there actually can't make any money because we give them the grain so cheap they can't sell it. So even if they grow it, they can't make any money because you're giving it to them. We have to really wonder about that type of globalization. So one of the things as an NGO, if you're going to go and try to help, how can you help them directly and giving them seeds, for instance, that would have food producing plants that they can take care of themselves and own themselves? That would be a much better solution than flying food in airplanes. So the soil life, tamarinds, supins, vitax, these are all really great trees that work in these areas. The understory may develop from larger trees. So what we can do is put one tree in and then start to build the polyculture. And over time, one of the first things, let's say, if I thought about doing it, let's say I go to one of these places, I come with a bag, I have my legume trees. I start a nursery, and for the first year, all you need to do is work on growing trees. And if we can get the trees, then we get the trees in, and in 3 to 5 years, we can change the situation. But if you go in and we don't work on changing the situation by putting the trees back, because most of the places don't have tree cover anymore. So that's the major issue. You get to a point where 80% of the trees have been cut down, we have to put the trees back. And these are great species. So if we do that, soil life, they're going to break down. We can start to create this humic material. We start to get life back in the soil. We start to circulate minerals. And with minerals, a lot of the problems that we come to poorer places in the world, they have mineral deficiencies. The kids are eating food, right? But guess what? The food is mineral deficient. So even though they get enough calories, they still have all these health problems, right? So sometimes it's not a calorie intake, it's the minerals that are cycling. And the soil is the best way to fix health. Health in animals, health in humans, directly tied to minerals within the soil. So plant, how does this work? Well, I can go to a termite mound, and termites don't eat living things, they eat dead stuff. Just like the worms won't eat the living thing. So you go there and they actually plant food in the termite mound as a strategy. Great soil. So particular example of niche gardening, looking at a particular situation and exploiting a particular situation by planting your food in the termite's mound. So we can also search out any source of humus. So in these areas, their soils are poor in humic material. So any resource that we can get for humic material to build the soils is going to be a bonus. So any logs, branches of any type of tree, detritus from stands of trees, which is basically any droppings of leaves, things like that. Any aquatic weed mats, if we see some area where we could get things out of aquatic weeds. Crop residues from any type of crop and or manures from any type of animal system. Household waste, hedgerows or forage, so we can plant trees as a hedgerow. Or any kind of green mulching, as I said, green manures. All of these are going to be strategies that in these poor soil conditions you could look into to try to change those situations. Earth shaping, great one. Controlling water flow, passive water harvesting. Another issue, poor soils and water drains off. So if we can hold the water and we can work on the humic material, we can change the regime. So on very flat sites, less than 4 degrees, a series of raised mounds can operate to drain crops in wet areas or to impound water for absorption in dry areas. So here, one issue is that in the dry season, I have to pump water to my garden. There's no choice. And in the rainy season, if I dug a hole, it would flood, right? So here we have raised beds. But if I was in a place that was dry all the time, gets very little rainfall, then you don't make raised beds, you dig holes. So you raise the path and you lower the garden. So the little bit of rain that comes goes into the garden and stays in the garden. The garden stays cooler. So you dig down, plant in the hole, and then raise a path is a very good, appropriate strategy. So pits can be used where rainfall is less than 75 centimeters. They retain mulch and moisture, and and this works really well in what you might consider deserty situations, or here in certain times of our year. So any other type of earth shaping that you may look at is almost every slope benefits from earth shaping. So anytime there's a slope, the ability for you to shape the earth will impact the water retention. So garden terraces on very steep slopes, here we can see some in Bali. They need to be kept very narrow. If not, you could get into an erosionary event where the actual has a landslide. Okay, so these are 6 or 8 slopes down may result. So we can see that in Bali. And any type of classical wet rice or taro terraces is very appropriate in these situations. Water constantly led into the top terrace of the series. Each has a drain and a sump to regulate the water level, so it's always the exact same water level, say year-round. And fish may be grown in any of these deep terraces also, and that gives a protein source. So we have a carbohydrate, right? A protein source, and then any other type of herbs. And any other earth shaping, about 1/3 of the total terraced area should be devoted to mulch tree crops. So if we go to look at terracing, we also have to make sure that we have tree crops that grow the fertilization. So we take the leaves or the mulch from the trees and we put into the terraces. So when they flood, it rots, and that's how they feed the rice. So the fertilizer from the rice is coming organically, would be coming from the trees. So here we can see us doing that in more gardening situations, so specific growing situations. You can make banks or bunds. You can slope faces of walls into the sun, so we make sure that we're looking at the sun angle. We can put trellises off of these, as we can see, and any ditches or drains and steep unterraced slopes. The flatter the area of the terrace itself, so make sure that you keep it dead level. That's where your A-frame can come in. Flattening the terrace, spreading the water out, letting it soak in, you're going to do really well in these situations. So any type of slope stability, sometimes it's too steep and I can't make a swale. If I try to dig, the rains would come and it'll get an erosionary event. So here I can use grass. So if we get any type of clumping grass, right? Think about, for instance, you guys see I have a lot of the lemongrass, right? It's got a great clump. So if I go and I plant lemongrasses in a line on contour, they will clump together. And if the water comes down, it'll hit the clump like a pinball machine, and slows it down and it'll drop descent. So we can here see people planting lines of grass, clumping grass, to slow down overland water flow without the need to dig.